Hello and welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching Focal Length, your one and only show to have a better insight on the most pressing issues shaping the global dynamics. Today on Focal Length, we turn our lens to the fast-changing strategic landscape of the Indo-Pacific, as major players like the US, China, Japan and India recalibrate their positions. Questions of rivalry, partnership and power are reshaping the region. We'll explore how countries like Japan, South Korea and Australia are influencing this balance, examine the growing competition between Washington and Beijing, especially as President Xi Jinping ramps up his regional outreach. We will also delve into how Asia-Pacific nations are navigating the pressure to pick sides in the changing geopolitical dynamics. With India's rising diplomatic influence and North Korea's persistent provocation, what opportunities and risks lie ahead for cooperation and security? Joining us today is a leading voice on Indo-Pacific affairs, Dr. Stephen Nagy. Dr. Nagy is a professor at the International Christian University in Tokyo, a visiting fellow at the Japan Institute for International Affairs, and the director of policy studies at the Yokosuka Council of Asia-Pacific Studies. His research focuses on how middle powers are responding to great power rivalry and shaping the Indo-Pacific's future. Thank you for joining us on Focal Length, Dr. Nagy. My first question to you is focusing on what role are countries like Japan and South Korea and also Australia playing in shaping the Indo-Pacific strategic environment?
Well, most importantly, what we think is, and what we've seen is, Japan lay out a broad vision for what's so-called the free and open Indo-Pacific, focusing on the maritime domain, focusing on stable sea lines of communication, and working with key partners such as India, Southeast Asia, South Korea, and of course the United States to make sure that happens. The strategic priorities from Japan's point of view, but I also think South Korea's point of view and India's point of view, is to ensure that the region remains stable, remains multipolar, and ensures that no one country dominates the region in a way where they can coerce countries or push countries into taking on positions that are fundamentally counter to their national interests.
How would you describe the current state of power competition in the Indo-Pacific, especially with Xi visiting multiple countries in the region?
Well, the Indo-Pacific's power balance is in flux, quite frankly. The two most powerful countries within the region, that's the United States and China, they're by far the most powerful countries. If you take a look at comprehensive power such as the Asia Power Index by the Lowy Institute, shows that countries like China really are way ahead in terms of economic networks, but we have countries like Japan that are building very, very strong diplomatic and infrastructure partnerships, as well as many-lateral partnerships with countries like India, the Philippines, Australia, and of course the United States. As we think about President Xi or Secretary General Xi's visit to Southeast Asia, he's visiting Vietnam to strengthen bilateral relations with that country, but also Laos and Cambodia. Three countries that have similar political systems as China. But I think we should be very clear that this does not mean that Vietnam, Cambodia, or Laos are siding with China. Rather, I think their behavior demonstrates that they're leaning towards the so-called West. Vietnam is a very good example of that. Before welcoming Xi Jinping to Vietnam, they strengthened their relationships with the United States, with the EU through a trade agreement, by signing the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, and of course strengthening bilateral relations with Japan, the United States, and the EU. So their view is engage with China from a position of strength that is really something that many countries are doing. They understand that China is an important economic partner, but China dominating the region is fundamentally against their interests.
How are countries in the Asia-Pacific responding to increasing pressure to choose sides in the US and China rivalry?
So the general trend is that we're seeing is something called multiple alignment. is that countries don't feel like well, they don't want to choose between the United States and China, but on particular issues they do. So, for example, the Philippines is sided with the United States on security issues and in the South China Sea. On security issues, Japan, South Korea, the island of Taiwan really are siding with the United States. But on economy, we see that Southeast Asian countries and even India continue to foster a strong economic relationship with China because China still is the biggest economic power within the region, and that over the past 20 or 30 years, it has been the center of the region's economic integration path. And of course, that's changing. It's changing as the dynamics within China and the economy slows down, as geopolitical threats and challenges are pushing other countries to think differently. But what we see is that the countries within the region, especially Southeast Asia, are leaning towards the United States, but still maintaining strong relations to have those economic benefits with China. Where other countries that are much more powerful, like Japan, like South Korea, and even island states like Taiwan, are clearly siding with the United States on security issues, but they still want to have strong economic relations with China while diversifying towards Southeast Asia, towards India, and towards Europe. Lastly, I think it's important to look where the foreign direct investment is going. It's pivoting away from China towards Southeast Asia, India, and Central Europe. And this is indicative that supply chains are slowly moving in those directions, as well as those production networks for global production. And this is generally the pattern that we see over the past 5 or 6 years. And this is the direction that we're going to be headed over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years as the global economy resets.
How effective has Japan been in bridging ASEAN and the Quad?
So Japan is a leader in terms of bridging different kinds of institutions. I sometimes call it an international adapter state. It functions as almost a power converter where it can link a socialist state to a democratic state or an ASEAN to the Quad. And what we see is that Japan acts as this translator so that the Quad countries can work better, more seamlessly, and understand the needs of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and provide for those needs, for example, in terms of technology, infrastructure and connectivity, and some kinds of security provisions. And that's mostly with regards to search and rescue activities, contributing to illegal, unregulated, undocumented fishing activities. Also thinking about how Japan can work with the Quad to help ASEAN develop its own human capacities so it can manage their own security environment. Japan continues to have this role, and we should watch how it acts as this international adapter connecting different kinds of states moving forward, because it is geographically in the Indo-Pacific. It has very strong institutions and democratic principles and rule of law, like Western countries, but it also has its strong own tradition that it tries to remain strategically autonomous by working with all kinds of countries.
With India emerging as the leader of the global south, how do you assess her role in the geopolitical dynamics, especially in the Indo-Pacific region?
So India is a really important partner for many countries. I think that its role within the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue is extremely important. It is a developing country still, but it's working side by side with developed countries like Japan, like Australia, like the United States. And this sends a really strong signal to the global south or the developing world that developed countries like the U.S, like Tokyo, Japan, like Australia, see India as an equal partner in providing public goods to the global community. And this is an extremely important narrative because what we've seen out of China is to try to create this narrative that the current international order that we have was built and is dominated by Western countries. And I think that, again, India's role as a leader within the global south, but also working side by side with developing countries, is really important to demonstrate that India is a global leader. It's respected by other countries and has that incredible role of trying to provide public goods and consensus within the developing world to deal with challenges such as development, challenges such as health, challenges such as infrastructure and connectivity. And I think this will continue to be India's role, as well as India advocating for the important developmental needs of the developing world.
North Korea has been trying missiles and weapons constantly, posing a threat to the Indo-Pacific region. How far do you think North Korea is succeeding in threatening the region, or do you think it's just a game of show for Kim Jong-un?
So North Korea is one of the biggest challenges facing the Indo-Pacific region. It has acquired nuclear weapons, and it's acquired the technology to launch them to the United States. We call them intercontinental ballistic missile systems. It also has a track record of at least trying to proliferate them. We saw there's some evidence that it tried to proliferate these weapon systems to terrorist organizations in the Middle East. We also saw chemical weapons being used to assassinate Kim Jong-un's brother in Malaysia at the airport. This is very dangerous, and we think that North Korea will continue to acquire more nuclear weapons into the 2030s to maintain its regime. We also see North Korea working with Russia in Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. Troops are there. They're working and fighting alongside Russia, but at the same time, they are gathering information about how a modern 21st conflict is being prosecuted. This is from the offensive side, but also the defensive side. And my assumption is that they're going to bring this knowledge home in their efforts to destabilize the Korean Peninsula and potentially use these tactics in South Korea and against the United States. Proliferation in North Korea is also likely going to result in South Korea acquiring a nuclear deterrent of its own in the next 5 to 10 years. And this means that weapons proliferation in the Indo-Pacific is only going to increase, and this creates more instability rather than stability.
Where do you see the biggest opportunities for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific over the next 5 or so years?
Well, I do think that we're balkanizing, or we're splitting the Indo-Pacific into, I think, countries that by and large follow and work with China, and countries that by and large work with countries like Japan or the United States, Australia, and India. So this is where we're going to see those cooperative networks split. So I think things like the environment is an area that we're going to continue to see cooperation. But things like AI regulation or cyber sovereignty, we're going to continue to see a bifurcation into authoritarian-led systems, and then systems that are more dominated by countries that abide by rule of law and what we would call democratic. Other areas I think that are possibilities for crosswalks, even between these two different systems, may be a transnational disease. COVID-19 was just one disease in a long list of diseases that we will be challenged moving forward. How do we find opportunities to cooperate? I do think that we're going to continue to see more cooperation in the Indo-Pacific to try and stabilize sea lines of communication. And interesting enough, one of the areas that is probably the most dangerous, Taiwan and the Taiwan Straits, we're seeing more and more understanding that Taiwan is a global public good, and that what happens to Taiwan matters for the global community. In the case of India, India is a large recipient of FDI from Taiwan as Taiwan tries to create production networks and manufacturing centers in India. Southeast Asia as well. It is the third largest recipient, Taiwan is the third largest FDI provider to Southeast Asia. So when we think about Taiwan and its position within the Indo-Pacific and an area of cooperation, what we're seeing more is multilateral diplomacy recognizing Taiwan as a global public good, and that is an important form of cooperation that brings resources into the region, but avoids discussing Taiwan through the lens of a one China policy, something that has really hamstringed an effective diplomatic engagement with Taiwan and ensuring that it remains peaceful, stable, and that cross-strait relations continue to develop peacefully.
How has Japan's Indo-Pacific vision evolved under Prime Minister Ishiba? Is it more assertive or still grounded in multilateralism?
So Prime Minister Ishiba came into power in September 2024. He was in many ways an accidental prime minister. We didn't really expect him to come into this position. And since that time, his focus has primarily been on the United States and ensuring that the U.S.-Japan alliance remains the cornerstone of Japanese foreign policy. But at the same time, Ishiba has continued much of the hard work of the former prime minister, the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, in trying to strengthen the momentum of creating a free and open Indo-Pacific vision and ensuring that those sea lines of communication remain strong and stable, and making sure that that conflict is something that's avoided. He's also put more and more effort in trying to help the developing world through the provision of infrastructure and connectivity, overseas development aid, trying to encourage foreign direct investment to move into these sectors. Again, this all contributes to countries developing. He's also put a lot of effort into strengthening the relations between Japan and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations to try and strengthen their strategic autonomy and ensure that they continue to be a reliable partner that's not subject to economic coercion or economic influences from China. More can be done, but as always, Japan takes things incrementally and step by step and tries to build strong relationships of trust to build shared understandings of how the Indo-Pacific region should continue to evolve. In part and included in that broader mission is to build a strong, complementary, and synergistic relationship with India, a partner that Japan believes will be critical to creating a multipolar Indo-Pacific region that pulls the center of economic gravity away from China and distributes more evenly throughout the broader Indo-Pacific region.
What could derail middle power collaboration in the region, be it economic shocks, military conflict, or diplomatic steps?
This is a great question. And when we think about middle power cooperation, we're thinking about those countries that are not as powerful as the top two, China and the United States, in terms of comprehensive power in the Indo-Pacific. And what we see is that Japan is working within the Quad, with India, with Australia, which are today both middle powers. And this is not to say that India is not going to be a great power in 10 or 20 years, but how it behaves and its current resources suggest that it is a middle power. So it works with India in the Quad to try and provide public goods to the region. But in other areas, what we see is middle powers work in what we call mini-lateral partnerships, groupings of 4 or 5 countries to deal with regional issues in a functional way. So, for example, the Filipinos, the Australians, the Japanese, and the Americans are working together in the South China Sea to try and push back against some of China's assertive behavior. We also see other kinds of mini-laterals in which Japan is trying to work with Australia and New Zealand and other countries in the Pacific Islands. So this is how problem solving is emerging to deal with the limited resources that actually exist in the region, is that you develop these different kinds of mini-lateral relationships with other countries to target resources, to be more focused in what you do, and to have some sustained, meaningful diplomatic engagement. Now, this of course, won't work with something like Taiwan, which is likely going to result in not only a regional war, but a global conflict. But on smaller issues, this kind of mini-lateral or middle power problem-solving diplomacies, it's going to continue to be the currency of the Indo-Pacific region because it's flexible. It allows for lots of different formulas of cooperation, and it doesn't require so many resources to deal with those challenges.
And that's a wrap on this edition of Focal Length. Thank you, Dr. Nagy, for joining us as we explored the forces shaping the Indo-Pacific. We'll be back soon with more insights, voices and analysis from around the world. For more of the latest international news, make sure you're following NewsX.